And what is going on, my Houston Texans family? We got some breaking news. A lot of you guys already know what's going on, but the Houston Texans, it was first reported by Aaron Wilson. Shout out to him. The Texans are releasing safety CJ Gardner-Johnson, one of their big acquisitions in the offseason. You heard me say that CJ Gardner-Johnson was the cherry on top of this offseason of this D'Amico Ryans defense. He's no longer a Houston Texans. This is absolutely crazy. At first, I was upset. I'm not even going to lie to you. And then I read the article by DJ Bieniemy, ESPN Houston reporter. We're going to jump into the article, but I want to hear your thoughts. How are you feeling about the Houston Texans releasing CJ Gardner-Johnson? But first, this episode is brought to you and powered by Sleeper. Think you know football? Then try to turn your football knowledge into real money with the Sleeper app. The ultimate fantasy sports app that can turn game day into payday. Just download the Sleeper app and pick more or less on your favorite players. With more stats than any other daily fantasy app, just choose two or more of your favorite players from pregame or live. Pick more or less from the predicted stats, and you could win up to 1,000 times your money if your picks win. Use promo code 713HOU, and you get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. Like I said, my first reaction was, what are we doing? The defense is not the issue. I saw a stat that said that the Houston Texans are the first team in NFL history to allow opponents to score less than, I believe, 50 plus something points and be 0-3. We are watching an historically bad Houston Texan offense. So to see this type of move, this type of player, I mean, it blew my mind. I literally stopped what I was doing and had to run to the restroom, right? You know how when you're at work and something important happens, you have to run and say, I got to take a shit. But I was like, I need some time to myself. You know, the minutes leading, I was just like, what is this team doing? CJ Gardner-Johnson, I know he hasn't been, good, but the defense is not the problem. Then we get to the article by DJ Bieniemy, and I haven't seen the article. I just got off, and we're going to react to this together. Shout out to DJ Bieniemy. In a surprise move, the Texans relieved CJ Gardner-Johnson on Tuesday, the team announced. In 3 starts, CJ Gardner-Johnson had 15 tackles, no interceptions, or pass breakups. The Texans traded their 2022 first-round pick left guard Kenyon Green to the Philadelphia Eagles for Gardner-Johnson in March, hoping to add a ball hawk. Gardner-Johnson had 6 interceptions in 2024 for the Eagles in their march to the Super Bowl. That's why we were excited about CJ Gardner-Johnson, right? He is elite at taking the ball away. So I was like, you're adding him to a secondary that has Derek Stingley, Kamari Lassiter, Kalen Bullock. This is going to be the best secondary in the NFL. Gardner-Johnson has struggled to pick up Coach D'Amico Ryans' defensive scheme this season, which has contributed to several big plays against the secondary through the first 3 weeks for the Texans, who are 0-3 to start the season. On Monday, Ryans was asked about the communication between his secondary players, admitting it hasn't been great. When you see a big play that happens on our defense, somewhere along the lines there's a bust in communication, Ryans said. It all starts with communication, and it hasn't been as crisp as it needs to be. We see that. We have to make some adjustments there to make sure we get it corrected. Well, I mean, you did correct it. You released CJ Gardner-Johnson. Just still crazy, by the way. Each of the Texans' 3 losses has been by 7 points or less. At minimum, according to team sources, Gardner-Johnson has allowed 3 big plays in those games that have contributed to the opposing offense scoring touchdowns. Adding that Gardner-Johnson has struggled to consistently guard the correct opposing player when required to match coverage based on the Texans' defensive call in the routes run by the offense. Struggles that also occurred during walkthroughs in the lead up to games. So it wasn't just on the game day. He was messing up at practice, it seems like. During Houston's Week 1 match against the Los Angeles Rams, okay, now we get into where C.J. Gardner-Johnson messed up. Quarterback Matthew Stafford threw a 13-yard touchdown to tight end Davis Allen, who ran a corner route in the end zone, which Gardner-Johnson was responsible for. Texans cornerback Kamari Lassiter tried to clean up the coverage bust, but wasn't able to run down Allen. Houston lost the game 14-9. In Week 2, Tampa Bay Buccaneers quarterback Baker Mayfield threw an over-the route to wideout Ryan Miller for a 20-yard touchdown on the game's opening drive. The Texans were in cover 2, which required Johnson to cover the deep half right of the field. He instead jumped a 10-yard in-breaking route from Buccaneers wideout Sterling Shepard, exposing the deep half for Miller's scoring reception. The Texans lost 20-19. Last week against Jacksonville Jaguars, Gardner-Johnson made a crucial mistake with the game knotted 10-10 late in the fourth quarter, jumping in an out-breaking route by Parker Washington when he was supposed to be responsible for anything over the middle of the field. Jaguars quarterback Trevor Lawrence pounced on the mistake, hitting receiver Brian Thomas on a post for a 46-yard reception down to Houston's 10-yard line against man-to-man coverage. Houston would allow Jaguars running back Travis Etienne to score a play later in an effort to preserve time for a game-rallying drive, but the damage was done and the Texans were unable to find the end zone, falling 17-10. Compounding the coverage bust, Gardner-Johnson had refused to take responsibility for his mistakes, rubbing his teammates the wrong way. Sources added with one member of the team saying C.J. Gardner finger pointed instead of owning up to the mistake. Whew. You see, that does sound like C.J. Gardner-Johnson, because this is not the first time we heard about something like this about C.J. Gardner-Johnson. The Texans host the Tennessee Titans on Sunday in Houston, but both teams are 0-3. The Texans are hoping improved chemistry would help them break into the win column. But there's something that let me see where, I don't know who put it out there, but there was someone talking about C.J. Gardner-Johnson talking about the contract of somebody else. Let me see if I could find it. And if not, we'll just move on. But that's what that's what I saw on X, Twitter, that there was also some complaints about a contract, and I think he was talking about Jalen Petrie there. I'll figure that up. Let me see, because I know Aaron Wilson has an article on it as well. Let's go to Aaron Wilson's article. Okay, the Texans are moving on for veteran safety C.J. Gardner-Johnson after dealing with friction involving him behind the scenes per league sources. The Texans later made the move official, announcing his outright release. Among the issue arose for Gardner-Johnson per sources criticism of teammates in the secondary, including the size of one player's contract. Okay. Complaints about his role, including a desire to blitz more frequently and a trade request, along with him making frequent comparisons what was he was accustomed to with the Philadelphia Eagles Super Bowl championship squad. There was also a reoccurring tendency with Gardner-Johnson to allow game-change plays. Okay, we got to that. So Aaron Wilson tells us about the things going on behind the scenes. DJ Bieniemy gave us what was going on the field. They both look bad for C.J. Gardner-Johnson. Like I said, the defense isn't an issue of this team. It's not going to be an issue of this team as long as DeMeco Ryans is here. So the fact that this was going on, I applaud the Houston Texans for making the move. I am no longer upset that the Texans let go of C.J. Gardner-Johnson. And then when you go back and look at the trade, you only gave up Kenyon Green and you swapped the late round pick, so you're really not losing it. Well, you are losing, right? You're losing one of the best ball hawking safeties, but apparently he was a quote-unquote cancer in your defensive secondary room. I will say this, though. If the Houston Texans are 3-0, 2-1, C.J. Gardner-Johnson is still a member of this football team. C.J. Gardner-Johnson is the type of player that you want when you're winning. Like I said, I called him the cherry on top. When it's going bad, though, how outspoken he is, it rubs a lot of people the wrong way. Regardless, C.J. Gardner-Johnson, wherever you go, I want to wish you the absolute very best. Um, I can't wait to hear his side of the story because there is always two sides of the story. I want to know who he was criticizing. I want to know who was the player that he talked about in terms of the contract and let's role play here, right? Do you think the conversations, went like, why do I got to do that? This guy's the highest pay. That's how I felt like an argument with CJ Gardner-Johnson could have gone. Is this the spark that changes this Houston Texans team misfortune? Like I said, they're 0-3. It might not. But if they win on Sunday against the Tennessee Titans, I promise you they're going to throw a shot at this moment, right? They're going to say, yeah, when you have people in the locker room bought in, when you have people in the locker room, not just dogging on each other, good things happen. I will say, though, not everyone in the locker room is going to be buddy-buddy. Not everyone's going to like each other. There's people I've worked with that I don't like, and you guys would never know. Because you got to keep it professional. You got to keep it 100, At the end of the day, we got a job to do. But it felt like CJ Gardner-Johnson was just adding too much problems in the locker room. Requesting a trade, kind of crazy. Comparing us to the Philadelphia Eagles, that's fair. That's fine. They just came off of a Super Bowl win. Looking at somebody's contract pocket watching, that's crazy. That's where I say, all right, buddy, what are we doing here? With that being said, guys, CJ Gardner-Johnson, no longer a Houston Texans. They need a safety. Do they bring in Justin Simmons? I don't know. For more Houston Texans content, you guys know what to do. Feel free to follow me for more. Go Houston. Episode brought to you and powered by Sleeper. 713 HOU gets you a $100 deposit up to $100. I love you guys. Have a very blessed day.